Hello, all. Thank you. My name is Dr. Shelley Rothschafer. As the Director of Contemporary Writers Series, I would like to welcome you to our 19th year of celebrating this author series. For the 2015 and 2016 academic year, we will be inviting Dr. Carlos Ayer, a Cuban-American creative nonfiction memoirist, Michigan author Marty Jo Link, and poet Edward Hirsch. Before tonight's speaker, I would like to remind you to turn off your cell phones. I needed to remind myself this as well. Also, for more information about our series, please look us up on Facebook, Twitter, or our cws@aquinas.edu website. Introducing tonight's author is CWS programming member Kate Durkinor.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm so glad to see a good crowd here. You're going to love this evening. Welcome to our 19th season, and it's my happy job to welcome tonight's reader and author, Lisa Lenzo, as our first author of this year's lineup. Lisa hails all the way from Saugatuck. Yay, Saugatuck. She was born in Oklahoma, but raised in inner-city Detroit to a very interesting and quirky family. Her childhood in Highland Park informed her 1997 work titled Within the Lighted City. It's a short story collection that won the University of Iowa Press's 1997 John Simmons Short Fiction Award. A New York Times book review had this to say about it. Lenzo's 9 stories, set in and around Detroit, removed just enough of the solid foundation from beneath her character's footing. Some, like the teenagers in the story Stealing Trees, imperiled themselves without very much outside help, slinking into a ghetto to filch trees they plan to replant elsewhere. More quirky, even divinely foolish, is an angel named Thomas who appears in another story, botching his between lives assignments and suffering the consequences. The remaining stories form a novel in pieces about the Zito family, all but one told by a daughter, Annie. Of these, the stories titled Burning, Waiting, and the title story stand alone brilliantly, capturing family love, personal tragedy, and swelling disillusionment as Annie steps into adulthood during the 1967 riots in Detroit. Lisa Lenzo's latest work, Strangelove, is published by Wayne State University Press as of May 2014, and is a Michigan Notable Book Award, won the Michigan Notable Book Award in 2015. This one is a 9-story in novel-in-story format, looking at the topic of finding love after divorce. Her protagonist, Annie, is described by one critic as an intelligent, earnest, and pleasantly quirky character and narrator. Her efforts to repair her broken heart and find love again run the gamut from awkward and needy to reserved and wary. The characters of the men she becomes involved with are finely drawn depictions of the various forms of the modern male malaise. These are flawed and very human people. Lisa is a 1990 summa cum laude MFA graduate of the Western Michigan University Creative Writing Program. Her undergraduate career spanned at least 4 institutions, so maybe some of you might relate to that. She decided to be a writer when she went and lived in the woods in a tent in April in northern Lower Michigan when she was 18 years old. Yes, she read Thoreau. When not crafting words for the past 28 years, she has worked and driven for the Saugatuck-Douglas Interurban Transit Bus Service, which is great fodder for, I'm sure, many, many stories. Would you please help me welcome Lisa Lenzo to the podium?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well? Okay. I'm going to start tonight with a story from my first collection. Actually, the first story from my first collection. And I would have come dressed for this role, but I didn't want you to think I was kind of weird, so I'm going to just dress right here on stage. So this is my quick costume change. I hope I don't ruin my mic by doing this. The only thing you need to know about this story before I start is that the narrator, the person telling the story, is a white male teenager. That's why I'm trying to look more like a guy. You have to use your imagination a little bit. Can everybody hear me? Okay. This story is called Stealing Trees. We started stealing trees after the elms were dead and gone, when the city planted a twig in front of Frank's house. The twig had no branches and no leaves. It was as thin as a car antenna. From Frank's front stoop at dusk, it was invisible. So Frank and I started driving around at night and stealing thicker, bigger saplings, ones with branches and lots of leaves. We'd dig them up from the better neighborhoods in northwest Detroit, dump them into the trunk of Frank's Fairlane, and replant them on Frank's front lawn. Frank refused to call what we did stealing. He was always correcting me. Tree relocation, Stanley. The 57 Farron Street Tree Relocation Project. We could plant the trees at Frank's house because Frank's mother didn't live there, and Frank's father never noticed what we did. Mr. Chimick played cello with the Detroit Symphony, and when he wasn't in concert, he was upstairs in one of his rooms, either practicing music or listening to it. Occasionally, he'd wander downstairs and fry himself some eggs, then go back up without turning the burner off. I can still picture him leaving the house for a concert, dressed in his black suit, white hair springing out of place, walking past the trees without turning his head. I live 5 blocks over from Frank, and since my mother never passed by the Chimick's house, she never saw our accumulating collection of stolen trees. I suggested to Frank that we stop stealing trees after we'd bagged and replanted a half dozen. But Frank pointed out that stealing trees was less degenerate than setting tires on fire and rolling them down the ramp of the underground parking lot at Fairden and Woodward, something we used to do all the time in junior high. And by relocating lots of trees onto his front lawn, Frank said, and sneaking a few onto the lawns of our neighbors, we were helping to restore our city's reputation and name, Highland Park, City of Trees. We used to watch for the signs with these words, stamped in a circle around a tree silhouette, when we were little kids coming home from Detroit. Crossing over the Highland Park border, we'd shout, "Now we're in Highland Park." In those days, the elms formed a ceiling of leaves 100 feet up from Highland Park streets. I didn't notice the leaves over my head as I grew older, any more than people noticed the ceilings of their houses. But when I was a little kid, I used to look up past all the space to where the layers of green began and watch the breeze stirring the leaves and imagine myself up there. 10 years later, there wasn't a branch or leaf left in all of Highland Park's sky, but the signs were still standing. We watched for them on our way home from stealing trees, and though we still spoke out when we crossed over the border, our voices were quieter and our emphasis had changed. Most of the time, we'd be smoking a joint or a pipe. Now we're in Highland Park, we'd say. City of stolen trees, I'd sometimes add. Relocated trees, Stanley would insist. Or Frank, relocated trees, Stanley, Frank would insist. Daytimes that summer, Frank and I worked at the rag factory at Woodward and Cortland, cutting up new rags and washing and drying old ones for the guys at Chrysler. Evenings, we played basketball with Frank's neighbors, usually quitting when it got dark, but when we felt like it, playing on into the night, using the light Frank had rigged on his garage. The guys we played with said Frank should turn the light off and just use himself as a bulb. He was so pale, blonde white hair, moon white skin, that he almost glowed in the dark. They didn't comment on my whiteness, except for once when I was sunburned, and Dwight Bates followed me and I cried out. And Dwight said he thought all the tender white people had moved out of Highland Park. Besides stealing trees and playing ball, another thing we did that summer at night was sit around while Carol Baker cornrowed Frank's head. Cornrowing was big then, but just among black people. This was before Bo Derek. I'd sit on Frank's porch and watch Carol working through Frank's hair and listen to her fuss and scold and threaten to slap Frank if he didn't hold still. As Carol got close to finishing, she'd swear she'd never braid such a fine-haired, jumpety fool ever again. But Carol braided Frank every week all that summer, and whenever she went to slap him, her palm landed so lightly it was more like a stroke. Frank would reach up and take hold of Carol's hand, and Carol would pull back and threaten Frank some more. Frank just smiled and fingered his braids. He liked being fussed over, and the tight, close, pale braids kept his hair out of his face, which was perfect for playing basketball and also for stealing trees. In August of that summer, Frank's father had a heart attack and died. Frank and I found him on the floor of his practice room with his tiger neck cello lying beside him. My mom said Frank could come live with us for a year. We had 1 year of high school to go. But Frank wanted to stay where he was. He'd lived in that house all his life. 2 weeks after Mr. Chimmick's funeral, Frank decided that we should steal a tree from downtown. He had seen its picture in the paper next to an article about the new Blue Cross building. The tree stood out in the foreground of the picture, a dome-shaped leafy maple. So far, we had stolen only locusts and oaks, the main kind of trees being planted back then. The maple looked almost too big to steal, but we decided to check it out in person. First, we smoked some marijuana. Then we drove downtown. The maple looked even better in real life. Its hundreds of leaves were perfect and huge, and it looked as if its branches had been set in their upward-outward curves with a whole lot of planning and expertise. But there were too many cops cruising around down there. They never gave us a clean opening. At 2 o'clock in the morning, we got back on the Chrysler Expressway again, lit another pipe, and headed north, back toward Highland Park. We hadn't gone a mile when Frank spotted the tree of heaven on the freeway slope. Later, planting the tree on his lawn, Frank said, "I've thought of another name for our project, the Otto Chimmick Memorial Grove." But when he first saw the tree of heaven, Frank didn't mention his father. He didn't say anything at all. He just pulled over onto the shoulder and looked at me with his high, shining eyes. "What are you doing?" I said. Frank pointed at the tree. "What?" I said. "You want that tree?" It wasn't the best-looking tree, even from the car, just your typical ghetto tree that grows anywhere at all, but mostly in vacant lots and from between sidewalk cracks. Not the kind of tree that anyone plants, let alone steals. I looked at it, branches angling downward like palm fronds, then at the green sign hanging from the freeway overpass just ahead. Mac, half a mile. On our trips between downtown and Highland Park, we had seen the sign plenty of times, but we hadn't even thought of stopping here before. This was a part of the city where black people didn't stop unless they knew someone who lived here, and white people didn't stop here at all. The tree was growing close enough to the overpass that if a car crossed overhead, we could hide below, and if a car came down the freeway, we could scramble up on top of the overpass. I tried not to think about what we would do if cars came by both places at the same time. Frank pulled on the hood of his black sweatshirt and tucked handfuls of his long braids inside the hood until none of the dozens of plates showed. I pulled on my black baseball cap. Then we got out of the fair lane and started up the grassy slope. Old, dry litter cracked like glass under our feet. I looked at the overpass to my left and felt like I was on another planet. All my life I'd seen freeway embankments and overpasses, but never from this angle. The overpass at eye level, the embankments landing under our feet. Nothing between the overpass and us, nothing between the grass and us, but the cold night air. Standing on that hill made the whole world seem tipped and slanted. It seemed like the world had been set on its edge. I spread the garbage bag beside the tree. Frank pushed the shovel into its hilt 8 times, cutting a circle around the skinny trunk. He had just got the roots separated into their own private clump when we heard a raggedy car in the distance, up on street level. Suddenly, it seemed a bad idea to duck under the overpass. It came to me that every movie that ended badly had people getting wasted in closed-in concrete places. Frank and I glanced at each other. Then he ditched the shovel, and I dropped the bag. and we ran the rest of the way up the slope and jumped out on the service drive and started walking along it as if we had not just run up there from the expressway canyon. Soon we heard the raggedy car, or at least a raggedy car, approaching from behind us. We forced our breathing slow, tried to loosen our legs and our shoulders. The car drew closer and then alongside us. We turned our heads toward the car but kept walking. The driver, black as the car's upholstery, leaned his head out the window. "Can you please tell us how to get to the corner of Russell and Pearl?" he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of a prissy white man's. 4 or 5 others inside the car laughed. All of them were black. At least one was a girl. Frank smiled in the direction of the carload of people, trying to act as if he were relaxed enough to think their joking funny. He kept walking. I kept step with him, wondering where we were going. We were getting farther from our car. "You boys lost?" someone from the back seat said. "No," Frank said. "Oh, yeah," the driver said, sounding black this time. "You sure look lost." More laughter came from the others. Frank glanced at the driver. "Yeah, I know we do," he admitted, just the right amount of blackness creeping into his voice, enough to let them hear that he was not a total outsider, but not so much that he seemed to be making any sort of claim. We still kept walking, but we didn't say anything more. It was better to say too little than to say something wrong. "Where are you boys from?" the driver asked. This time Frank didn't answer. I steadied my breathing. "Highland Park," I said carefully, trying to sound offhand and matter of fact, as if I didn't expect my answer to boost their opinion of us. The girl shrilled something wordless from the back seat. "Highland Park," the driver said. "They let you boys stay in Highland Park?" "For now, I guess," I said. The driver eyed me more closely. Then he laughed, almost a friendly laugh, his lips breaking wide. He looked to be about 20 years old. He was wearing a light brown shirt zipped open at the throat. "And where you going later, man, when you got to move?" "I don't know, Romulus or somewhere," I said, with true dejection at the prospect. I'd never seen Romulus, but I had it pictured as rows of dirty white shoebox houses that collapsed when the jets flew overhead. "Romulus," someone from the backseat said. "Where the fuck is Romulus?" "I know where Romulus is," the driver said. He jabbed his finger in the air. "Shit, you got to move, man. Don't move to Romulus. Whites out there so mean they don't even like whites." "If I was white," the man in the passenger seat said, "I'd move to Grosse Pointe, Bloomfield Hills, something like that." "If you was white," one of the men in the back seat said. "Listen to the brother. If I was white." The 3 in the back seat laughed loudly and easily. I let myself smile, but kept my own crazy laughter down in my belly. "I got one other question to ask you," the driver said. The laughter stopped. I could feel all the ground I thought we'd gained slipping away from us. "Why was you digging up that tree?" The trouble that had been floating around grew bigger and clearer, pressed at the quiet. My vision started shrinking inward. I couldn't focus. I could hardly see. I didn't look at Frank or at the driver or anywhere. "I know there's plenty of them raggedy trees in Highland Park," the driver said. "So what I want to know is, what do 2 white boys from Highland Park want with a tree that's as common there as dirt? I mean, that tree is as common in Highland Park as homies are, am I right?" "We've been digging up all kinds of trees, from northwest Detroit mostly, and planting them in front of his house," I said, glancing at Frank. Frank was looking down at the pavement. "You boys really are lost," the driver said. "This is not northwest Detroit." Frank kept on looking down. I couldn't see his eyes. "Frank," I thought, "do something, save us." Frank had a way of winning people over to him, sometimes without saying a word. Too bad this wasn't a carload of old people or women or girls. But even among the guys at school, Frank was well liked for a white person. I thought of letting the men in the car know that Frank's father had just died. I thought of letting on somehow that he died just last week, just last night. But as soon as I thought of it, I knew it would be a mistake to bring up that subject at all. "I don't think you boys really are from Highland Park," the driver said. "I think you're from one of them suburbs where they let the raggedy white folks live. Taylor, maybe, or Romulus." I thought of ways to refute this. Name all the streets in Highland Park. Show the eraser burn tattoos our sixth grade classmates had rubbed into our shoulders at our request. But I thought that eraser burn tattoos might be a Highland Park black thing rather than a black thing in general. And Frank's and my tattoos wouldn't have shown up that well anyway in the dark, being white on white. In fourth grade, when our class was just about half black, the black kids in our class made plans to build a spaceship and fly to the moon, blowing up the earth as they left. They talked about it one day while the teacher was out of the room, said they wouldn't save a thing on earth except the people they took with them, and started calling off the passenger list. They named all the black kids in the room, and then one of them said, "And Frank Chimmick." "Yeah," another boy said, "Frank Chimmick is cool." After talking it over a little, they added my name too. Frank and I were the only two white people on earth they thought deserved to be saved. But of course I couldn't say this to those men in the car. I thought of all the times I'd wanted to convince something of someone. Convince a girl that I was the guy for her, or a teacher that my excuse was really real, or some guys who wanted to beat me that I didn't deserve to be beaten. The driver said something about taking us back to the tree. A deep voice from the back seat called out, "What you gonna do with him, Blood? Lynch him?" The whole group laughed hysterically. I couldn't help smiling, though it felt like the smile of a crazy man. "Let's lynch them and that sorry-ass tree," another voice from the back said. "Hang them all three from the overpass." The driver waited until the laughter died. "I don't like white boys stealing brothers' trees," he said. "No matter how sorry the trees is or the boys, y'all move over and make room for these boys." There was movement inside the car. A door clicked open. I jerked as if the click had come from a knife or a gun, and I guess Frank must have moved too. "Wait, wait," someone screeched. It was the girl. She scrambled forward so that her wide face and thick round arms leaned over the front seat. "Take off your hood," she said to Frank. Frank looked up from the street with that distant expression people and dogs wear just before they get beaten. "Fool," the girl said at someone slapping at her in the back seat. "Don't be pulling on me. Take off your hood," she repeated. Frank looked at the driver. "Go on," he said. Frank untied the string and pushed the hood back, and his blonde braids unfolded and fell all around him. "I knew it," the girl crowed. "They told me white folks couldn't do their hair like that, but I knew y'all could. I knew it. Come here, let me see." Frank didn't move. He just stood there with his braids lying in lines against his scalp, snaking down around his shoulders, practically glowing in the dark. "Damn, boy," the driver said, "did you get dunked in a tub of bleach?" "Maybe he's an albino," the girl said. "Maybe he's really black." She and the man sitting in the passenger seat started arguing. "Come on, woman, a white black man? Give me a break." "I saw a black albino once, man, in my social studies book. It was a purely white black man." "Girl, you're talking about an Oreo." "I'm talking about an albino. Don't you know what an albino is?" "Why don't y'all stop talking stupid?" the driver said. "The man is obviously white." "For real," the deep-voiced man agreed. "He's some kind of white freak." "No," another man from the back said. "He just wants to be black." "Is that it, man?" the driver said to Frank. "Do you wish you was black?" Everyone in the car looked at Frank. Frank lifted his head, his blonde braids tilting back, and looked at all the faces looking at him. "Right now I do," he said simply, his face serious but hardly afraid, a hint of pleasure at his joke showing around his mouth and his eyes. The men in the car laughed suddenly, with surprise. "Right now I do," one of them repeated, and everyone laughed harder, with the deep-voiced man saying, "No shit, no shit," over and over between the laughter of the others. When the laughter finally stopped, there was a floating sort of pause, like when you're standing on a teeter-totter with both ends off the ground. The driver said something to the others that I didn't quite hear. "Let's go," or "let them go." Then he turned back to Frank. "I don't know why in hell you want that tree, man," he said. "But if you still want it, go on and take it. Then take your crazy asses back home to Highland Park, or wherever it is you're from, before you run into some mean brothers or the police. And next time you want to steal a tree, go on out to Grosse Pointe or Bloomfield Hills and steal yourself a nice white tree, something like a pine tree, all right?" "All right," Frank said. The driver shook his head. The car rumbled off. Frank and I walked fast back to the freeway slope and lifted the tree of heaven into the garbage bag. Then we walked down the slanting ground, holding the bag tree between us, checking the wide gray freeway for cars. The huge overpasses on either side were suspended at our level. We were leaning back against the pull of the slope, taking big strides. It felt like we were traveling between planets, like we were walking down from the sky. It felt like we were aliens in both worlds, but at least the world we were heading toward was home. Thanks. For our next story, we're going to do a story from my most recent collection. It's called Flames, and rather than reading it, we're going to do a dramatic reading, which is kind of like a cross between a regular reading and a play. And I've got two actors here to help me. Come on up. It's here. This is Mariana Ramirez-Franco. She's going to be playing the part of the daughter. Kelsey Lynn Sievertson is going to be playing first the part of the bus mechanic and then of the legal aid counselor. And I'm going to be reading the role of the mother, who is also the narrator. So now I should look more like a mother. This is called Flames. The ringing phone reaches through the black call of my sleep. My eyes open on red numbers, 1:20 a.m., and I leap out of bed and stumble into the kitchen. As I pick up the handset, I am fully awake.
Mom, are you there?
Marley, what's wrong?
Mitch came home from the bar, and I wouldn't let him in, and he kicked down the door.
I ask if she's okay, and she says that she is. I flip on the light and ask where she is now.
I'm still here, in my apartment, waiting for the police.
Standing in my big kitchen, I look around me for a weapon, as if I could snatch it up and hand it through the phone line. Where's Mitch?
He went up to the 3rd floor, to Jared's apartment, I think.
What happened? Did he hurt you?
Not really. He pushed me and he was shouting. I told him I'd call the police, so then he stormed upstairs.
Why did you lock him out?
He said he was going out to the bar. I asked him not to. I told him he couldn't go to the bar and then come back here. I told him that if he came back here drunk, I wasn't going to let him in.
Beneath the surface distress and frustration in Marley's voice, I hear fear held in check. And all at once, I know she is holding something back. Mitch has come home drunk before tonight and mistreated her. He has hit her or forced sex on her or abused her in some other way, and probably on more than one occasion. Across my kitchen, on my butcher block, are my knives of various sizes, plus a 12-inch sharpening steel with a heavy wooden handle. I shrink from the idea of thrusting a knife into a man's chest, but I easily picture picking up the steel and bludgeoning Mitch with it. Do you have something you can use for a weapon in case he comes back?
I don't know. Let me think.
What about your pepper spray?
I don't have it anymore. I gave it to a friend.
I tell her to go get her sharpening steel and to hide all her sharp knives at the back of a drawer and to keep the steel in her hand. I listen to her moving about, and then she says,
Okay, I've got the steel.
Did you hide the knives?
I'm doing that now.
What about the door to your apartment? Can you push it back into place? Marley says it's not even a real door, just a piece of paneling left over from when they paneled the lobby, with a now useless deadbolt and chain attached. But she has leaned it across the opening to keep the cats from running out. I tell her to push the heaviest piece of furniture she can move up against it, and she says she has already pushed her big bookcase there. Okay, good. Keep your eye on the door while we're talking and don't let go of the steel. If he comes back, tell him that you have a weapon and that he better stay out. And if he comes in, don't wait for him to attack first. Hit him over the head as hard as you can, and don't stop hitting until he leaves or stops moving. It feels unreal to be standing in my kitchen at 1:30 in the morning and talking on the phone like this with my daughter, even though I've been through something similar with a friend whose ex-husband broke down her door twice. I wonder if I should hang up and jump in my car and race up to Marley's apartment in Grand Rapids, but it's a 45-minute drive from my house, and I'm afraid that, after I hang up, something else bad might happen. It makes more sense to stay on the line and talk with Marley and help her figure out what to do. If Mitch comes back downstairs and attacks Marley while we are talking, I can hang up and call 911 and tell them that Marley is in immediate danger. I try not to think of the worst-case scenario, that Marley might be murdered as I am standing in my kitchen while I listen to her cries through the phone. If I had a husband or a boyfriend, he could be driving up to Marley's apartment while I talk with her. I can't call Marley's dad for help. Ray is living in California with a second wife. And I can't call Richard, whom I haven't seen since last month, when I told him, after he left me for the second time, that I wanted no more contact with him. And anyway, Richard always shrank from any kind of confrontation. I consider my father and my 4 brothers with a yearning sadness. They all live too far away to come to our aid. If I had a cell phone, I could be driving to Grand Rapids right now, drawing closer to Marley every moment and talking with her at the same time. But maybe rather than my going there, the best plan is for Marley to leave her apartment and drive to my house. Marley, I'm thinking you should just come down here.
I can't. I have to wait for the police so I can tell them what happened and where Mitch is now.
Can't the apartment manager do that?
I called Kirk, but he didn't answer. He never answers his phone.
Did the police say how soon they'd get there?
No, but Wendell should be here soon. Before I called you, I called Wendell. He's working till 2, and he said he'd come over the minute he gets off.
Oh, good. We've known Wendell for years. He's the older brother of one of Marley's friends from grade school. Wendell goes to Grand Valley University during the week and tends bar in Grand Rapids on weekend nights. A year or so ago, I suggested that Marley date Wendell instead of just being his friend. Wendell is sweet, smart, engaging, and level-headed. Marley had smiled fondly when I spoke Wendell's name and narrowed her eyes as if picturing him and said,
He looks like a hobbit.
He does not. He's not very tall and he's not super handsome, but he doesn't look like a hobbit.
Like Frodo.
Marley, I think you pick your boyfriends by looks too much.
Oh, like you don't? Not that I think your boyfriends look hot at all, but you do. Even that dorky bald guy with that terrible mullet.
Okay, fine. Only date guys you think are really hot. But make sure they're good guys, too.
Good guys, bad guys.
What do you mean, Marley?
It's not so easy to tell all the time.
Thinking back to her words and her tone, I can hear the danger hidden in them. Mitch had been living with Marley then for about a year. He had lavished attention on her at first, calling her honey and darling and baby at every turn, gazing at her with what seemed to me false adoration. Marley gazed back as if hoping to believe him. Mitch's initial lavish attention soon became sporadic, and everything else about him has turned out to be sporadic too, including looking for work, going to work when he has a job, and helping out around the house. During the past year, Marley has asked Mitch to leave again and again, but he says he doesn't have anywhere else to go. Other than the attention he first paid her, I've never seen what Marley saw in Mitch. He has no evident ambitions other than to someday buy another motorcycle. He drinks a lot and smokes, and he isn't even much to look at. Small and wiry in an unhealthy way, wizened almost like an old man, although he claims he is only 28. He looks more like 35, and his facial features make me think of a gnome. He has seemed pitiful to me, but not dangerous until now. I asked Marley if she's keeping an eye on her doorway, and she says that she is. And you still have the steel in your hand?
Yes,
I just want to make sure you're ready in case he comes back.
I know. I will be.
Marley and I continue to talk. I wish, but keep to myself, that she had barred Mitch in a less confrontational way, that she had locked him out in the daytime and when he wasn't drunk, and that she had done it with someone there to back her up, a male friend or the apartment manager or even me. I look across the kitchen at the clock. It is 10 after 2. I wonder if I should have just driven up. I'd be there by now.
Quiet, Mom. Someone's at the door.
My breath seems to stop. I strain my ears for Mitch. Should I hang up? Dial 911? But I can't make myself cut my connection to my child. I hear a voice say, "Are you Marley?"
Mom, the police are here. I'll call you back.
I ask her to call me right away, and she says okay, and then the phone goes silent. I wander numbly around my kitchen, then stop beside my largest plant, whose leaves and vines spill down in lavish waves from the sink island to the floor. As I finger a leaf, my thoughts stray to Richard. Even though his second departure has left me still feeling, after a month, as if a hole has been torn in my chest, it's nothing compared to how I will feel if Marley is taken from me. Losing my first child right after her birth is the hardest thing I've ever had to get used to. Losing the only child I have left after loving her all these years would be more than I can take. I would murder Mitch. I would beat him to death with a baseball bat, even though I know that wouldn't really help. Too tired to keep standing up or to pace, I pull out a kitchen chair and sit back down at my oak table. The phone rings again. I click it on and breathe in at the sound of my daughter's voice. The police have left, Marley tells me. They were there for only 15 minutes. She sounds more frustrated than frightened.
They told me I have no right to lock him out because he lives here too.
What? Even though he's paying no rent and you've asked him to leave?
They say that doesn't matter, that because he lives here, he has a right to come in, even if he has to break down the door.
So once you let someone live with you, you're stuck with him for good?
Apparently.
That's crazy.
They say if he is violent, I can get a personal protection order, but until I have one, they can't do anything.
Marley's friend Wendell arrives and promises to stay the night with her, and after Marley hangs up, I lie back down on my bed. But I'm unable to sleep. What if Mitch returns, reinforced by more beer and maybe a weapon, and murders them both? Maybe he already did shortly after I hung up the phone. I won't find out if that has happened until I hear from one of Marley's neighbors or the police. Curled up on my side with my eyes closed, I can't help wondering what I might have done wrong in raising Marley for her to reach this point. Maybe if her father and I had stayed together, or I hadn't had so many boyfriends, she would now be in a healthier relationship. I've kept much of my love life to myself, and I've only once let a man spend the night when Marley was with me. But children know more than you tell them, more than you allow them to see. Still, while I've made some bad choices, I've made no really dangerous ones. I've never been physically harmed. Yet Richard's breaking up with me a second time knocked the wind out of my spirit and hurt as much as being beaten. It left my chest aching so much that it hurt to breathe. But whatever Mitch has done to Marley is surely worse. My mind approaches and then skitters away from what Mitch might have done to make Marley lock him out. I rearrange my blankets and pillows again and settle back in and pray for Marley's safety, even though I don't believe that praying really works. Why should my prayers be answered when so many other mothers are forced to live with the suffering and even the deaths of their children? I wouldn't be the first mother to lose more than one child. Finally, drowsiness overcomes me, and I fall into a deep but agitated sleep, full of vivid, disjointed dreams. Marley calls me at 6, sounding cheerful. She's in a van with Wendell and also Amelia, a friend of Marley's who has a black belt in karate. They are driving across town to Amelia's apartment with Marley's cats, her camera, her photographs, her computer, and as Marley phrases it, anything and everything else of sentimental value. Marley tells me that Mitch came back at 4 a.m. and broke down the door again, but when he saw Wendell, he retreated upstairs, and Wendell once again repatched and replaced the door. Marley spends the next 2 nights across town at her friend Amelia's apartment. On the 3rd day, she starts off for Chicago, where her dad's parents live. She's been planning for some time to fly out to California to spend a week with her dad, first staying one night with her grandparents, who will drive her to O'Hare in the morning. But as Marley is heading for Chicago, driving south on I-96, she calls me.
Mom, my car is acting really funny.
What's it doing?
It's shaking a lot.
What part of it is shaking?
All of it. It's shimming like crazy. It wasn't too bad at first, but in the last 10 minutes, it's gone way worse.
Well, you better not drive it to Chicago. Where are you now?
On the expressway north of Saugatuck.
You better swing by here and take my car.
Are you sure? The engine seems okay, it's just the body.
I tell her to leave her car with me, and I'll take it into work and have our bus mechanic check it over. 20 minutes later, Marley pulls her gold hatchback into my driveway. As she gets out of her car, her bright, unnaturally red hair strikes me as too noticeable, too easy to spot. She's been dyeing her hair fire engine red ever since she was 16, and for the first time I fear that it's not a safe color. Backlit by the sun, the tips of her hair glow like flames, as if her head is edged with fire. I want to suggest she wear a hood or re-dye her hair a dull brown, but I think I'm likely over-worrying, and I don't want to scare her further, so I don't say anything. I haven't seen Marley since Mitch broke down her door, so I'm even gladder than usual for the chance to wrap my arms around her slender shoulders. As I rub her bare arm with my fingers and look at her face, I wonder, as I have many times before, if my desire to touch her skin and feel her warmth and see her open eyes is stronger in me because I held my other child only once after her body was cold, and I only ever saw her with her eyes closed. I send Marley off to Chicago in my white Accord and drive her gold Civic into work. Luckily, it's only a 5-minute drive. The car feels as if it might shake apart. Jill, the bus company's mechanic, says she'll take it for a spin while I'm out picking up passengers. And when I come back later for a break and ask her if she's found out what is wrong, Jill says,
"The lug nuts on both front tires were loose. Some were so loose, I could turn them with my hand."
Jill is a laid-back, peaceful person, almost impossible to rattle, but now she looks grave and more alert than usual. With the clean back of her greasy hand, she wipes the sweat from her brow. We are standing in the parking lot outside the bus garage. Could those lug nuts have come loose on their own, or did someone loosen them on purpose?
Who would loosen them on purpose?
Marley's ex-boyfriend. She locked him out of her apartment a few nights ago, and he broke down the door 3 times after that. According to Marley's apartment mates, Mitch entered a 3rd time after Marley was gone by splintering the door with a crowbar.
Some guys have a hard time taking a hint they're not wanted.
I smile sourly and tell Jill that even though the manager finally kicked Mitch out of the building, he lurked around outside for the next few days. And during that entire time, for 2 nights and 2 days, Marley's car was parked in the untended lot next door. Jill looks down at the ground and shakes her head.
If she'd kept driving that car for much longer, the wheels would have disengaged. Not a good thing to happen when you're barreling down the expressway.
Although I miss her, I dread Marley's return from California. When I close my eyes at night, I see Marley's gold hatchback hurtling down the expressway, its wheels flying off, the car skidding on its axles. Although Marley's car is once again safe, a man who could demolish her apartment door and sabotage her car is capable of further endangerment. One day while I'm out buying groceries, I stop in a sporting goods store and buy 2 canisters of pepper spray, one to replace my old unused canister, and the other to replace the one Marley gave away. I also buy a cell phone. And on the morning after Marley returns from visiting her dad, we drive from my house, each in our own car because we'll go our separate ways later, to meet for a consultation at the Center for Women in Transition. The legal aide on duty is a young lawyer who volunteers at the center. Marley tells her about the incident with the door.
And besides the door, were there other incidents?
What do you mean?
Was Mitch abusive in other ways? For instance, did he call you names or make threats?
Not names, but he's made threats. He's said some really terrible things. Sometimes he would say something so awful that I couldn't really believe it. It was like something out of a gangster movie. I tell myself that I must have heard him wrong because people didn't talk like that in real life.
Can you remember what he said?
Marley sits with her shoulders tense and hunched, and her face half turned away from me.
I know it's hard to talk about, but the judge is going to want to know the details. You won't have to repeat any of this in court. I'm just taking a few notes, and then I'll help you fill out the request, and you'll take it to the court, and the judge will read it and make his decision. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Marley continues to look down at the table as if waiting for something. Finally, it occurs to me that she doesn't want me to hear her answers. I'm going to go find a bathroom.
Okay.
I leave the room, closing the door behind me. I find a bathroom and use it, even though I don't really need to, and then wander the center's halls. T-shirts of bright yellow, pink, lavender, white, and blue are pinned to the walls all along one hallway, each with a different woman's name hand-painted on it. Sharon, Ashley, and Kathy, Maria, Katie, and Pam, Jessica, and Christine. In smaller writing around the women's names are handwritten messages. A wonderful mother. My dearest daughter. We love you. She will be missed forever. At the end of the line of T-shirts is a poster with an explanation. The names on the T-shirts are the names of local women who have been abused and killed by their husbands and ex-husbands, their boyfriends and ex-boyfriends. These T-shirts, the poster further explains, have been made by the children, mothers, sisters, and friends of the battered and murdered women. At the bottom of the poster is a list of statistics. Domestic violence is the #1 cause of injury to women in the U.S. 1 in 3 women are battered at some time in their lives. 4,000 American women are killed by their partners every year. I turn away from this hallway and make my way back to the conference room, stopping a few feet from the doorway so that I can look in through its window without being seen. Marley is talking, and Teresa is listening intently, a yellow legal pad with a few scribbled notes before her. I fade back from the conference room door, walk down the hall in the opposite direction, and stop before another wall poster that reads in big purple letters, "No one deserves to be sexually assaulted," and underneath in smaller black letters, "Help and support are available." Below this is a list of common reactions to rape: fear, anxiety, shock, disbelief, helplessness, depression, anger, shame, embarrassment, self-blame, guilt, flashbacks, and isolation. I read the rest of the poster, then return again to within a few feet of the window that looks into the conference room. Teresa is still sitting quietly, but her legal pad has been pushed aside. Marley is bent over a form composed of two pieces of paper joined at the center. She's writing quickly, words flowing from her pen. As I watch, she flips the double sheet over, which is filled with her tiny handwriting, and continues on the back side. I fade back from the conference room door, and this time I wander the halls without looking at or reading what is on them, fretting and fuming, trying not to think of what Mitch might have done to my child. Maybe I should kill Mitch, rather than wait to see if the personal protection order will work. It's just a piece of paper. A lot of men ignore PPOs and continue to abuse and eventually murder their girlfriends and wives. Why should I wait to see whether Mitch will obey the order and stay away from Marley? Why should I give him another chance to do her harm? Marley's apartment mates didn't see Mitch during the week Marley was in California, and Marley has not seen or talked with him since the night she locked him out. But after Marley returns to her apartment, Mitch might show up again. When I return to the conference room door for a third time, Marley is still writing, but nearing the end of the fourth and last page of the document. I open the door and take the seat beside her, and she writes to the end of the page.
I'm done.
I glance over at the form and her shaking hand. Is this what you'll give the judge?
Yes.
Would you like me to read it?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure. There's no reason for you to see this.
Okay. I fold my arms across my breasts, sit back in my chair. When Marley was 3 and 6 and 10, and I would coddle her or hover, my father would admonish me, "When are you going to cut the cord?" My mom would defend me and at the same time gently tease me. "She's cutting it, a little at a time." At the Center for Women in Transition, we've reached another of those times. Is it harder for me to sit back and do nothing because right after my first child's cord was cut, I was involuntarily sedated, and by the time I regained consciousness, she had died? But wouldn't any mother, not just those who have already lost one daughter, string whole nets of cords around their girls to ensure their safety? Except no cords or nets are strong enough, and nothing and no one can be insured. Marley hands the form filled with her tiny handwriting to Teresa, who reads through the pages quickly, her eyes flickering, her lips thinning and tightening. When Teresa comes to the end of the statement, she looks up, her face grim, and says,
You won't have any problem. The judge will grant you that order without question.
That afternoon, the judge grants the personal protection order, and two of Marley's friends deliver it. Marley calls me in the evening.
Wendell and Amelia delivered the PPO. Mitch started to read it. Then he crumpled it up and threw it on the ground. But that doesn't matter. As long as he touches it with his hand, it's considered served.
What if he's angry, Marley? What if he comes looking for you?
Wendell and Amelia are here with me. And like you say, Mitch is a coward. Plus, he really hated that time he spent in jail, and he's afraid of being put back in.
He was in jail before?
Yeah, I told you. About 10 years ago for vagrancy in Texas.
2 more days pass without incident or news of Mitch. Then Marley hears that Mitch has gone to live with his sister in Lubbock, that she sent him money for a one-way bus ticket, and he left for Texas the same day. Marley decides she wants to train to be a veterinary technician, and she has her name placed on the waiting list of a vet tech program in Muskegon. Meanwhile, she finds another temp filing job and begins volunteering at an animal shelter. One day I call her as usual.
I helped adopt out another kitten today. A real sweet little boy. Oh, Gray. And that skittish orange girl who was found stinking of lighter fluid with her face and body singed. She's beginning to warm up. She really surprised me today. I was petting her, and she closed her eyes and leaned right into my hand.
Marley says that she and the other shelter workers are still looking for a name for the young orange cat that was doused with lighter fluid and, they suspect, intentionally set on fire.
I'd like to call her Flame, partly because of her color, but mainly because of what happened to her. And we're also considering Phoenix and baptism by fire.
They've come up with other names, unrelated to the cat's appearance or her circumstances, but none of them have stuck so far. Marley and I chat on the phone a little longer. As we are hanging up, Marley says,
So, Mom, how long are you going to keep calling me every day?
There is a smile in her voice as well as a challenge. About a month has passed since she phoned me at 1:20 in the morning. I don't know. I guess I can stop.
You can keep calling me every day if you want. It's up to you. But you can quit worrying now.
We say goodbye, and I set down the phone. Wandering around my kitchen, I remind myself to not dwell on Marley's splintered door, or the loosened lug nuts of her car, or the T-shirts at the center painted with the names of battered and murdered women. Instead, I think of the young orange cat that was set on fire but is now recovering. And I think of her potential names: baptism by fire, Phoenix, Flame. And in my mind, I see Marley, surrounded by fire, yet unsinged. Not Marley as she is now, with her mane of flaming hair, but when she was just born, red-faced, wailing in protest, already struggling, already strong, twisting and kicking in the doctor's grasp, even before the cord was cut, unlike her quiet sister, ready to take on the world. Thank you. Mariana Ramirez-Franco, Kelsey Lynn Siebertson, thank you very much. Thank you. You could stay up here if you want. You guys can stay up here.
For the last 15 minutes, we'll have a question and answer period that Lisa will answer. And there are microphones right over here, so if you have a question, please go grab one so that we can hear you and it can be recorded well. Thank you.
This is a really stupid question, but how does it feel to be a well-known Michigan writer?
I don't know how to answer that question. I don't feel like I'm really that well known, but
Yeah.
as well known as I am, it feels good.
All right. And then and then just one more question so I don't hog time. Just what does writing mean to you?
It's the thing I like to do best. Makes my life worthwhile. Not that there aren't other things that make my life worthwhile, but
Yeah.
it's my passion.
That's cool. Well, thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Mhm. Don't be shy. No question is too stupid. Here comes somebody. Ah.
Hello. I must ask, is Flames based off of a true story?
Yes, it is. It's
Yeah.
very autobiographical.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry you had to deal with that because it's quite tragic. But
Yeah, well, it turned out good in the end, so
yeah, definitely.
thank you. Anybody else?
In the early stages of your writing career, did you draw inspiration from another author or other authors? And if so, do you mind me asking who?
Yeah, I think very early on I read a lot of Doris Lessing. She's not much known these days, but she wrote a lot of stories and novels back in the 1970s. I went to school at Western Michigan University, and I had two very good writing teachers who are also very good writers, Stu Dybeck and Jamie Gordon, and I read their work and learned from them too.
Thank you.
Sure.
And welcome to Aquinas.
Oh, thanks. Anybody else? Do I see any hands back there? Oh, there's one right there.
Besides writing, what do you like to do?
I like to walk. I like to read. I guess most writers like to read. I make jam sometimes. It's sort of a strange thing. I make all kinds of weird jam, like quince and gooseberry and wild grape thing. Thanks.
Okay, don't be shy. Who's got a question?
Here's one.
In writing your short stories and other works, what do you think is your most helpful tool or your most helpful tactic to express exactly the ideas that you want to get down on the paper?
Boy, that's a hard one. I don't know if there's just one tool, but I guess the usual things. Try to write often. Don't just write when you're inspired, but try to get a daily writing practice going. Do a lot of reading. Read if you're working on short stories, read other short story writers. If you're working on novels, read other novels. Not that you have to do that. You can also read your favorite gardening magazine or other things, but a lot of reading. And I think I keep a lot of journals. I have like an everyday journal where I just write down things that have happened to me, and I don't write it in every day. I just say every day as in to differentiate between all my other journals. I have a gardening journal and I have a writing journal in which I keep track of whatever I'm working on. So if I have new ideas for a story or if the novel that I'm working on, I need to write down new information. I think if you are stuck with a story, sometimes it's good just to open up your journal and kind of talk to yourself, but write it down. Don't let the thoughts just turn in your head, but say, well, I'm having trouble with this story. I've done this and this and that, but this isn't working. This is working. I'm not sure what to do now. And also show your work to your writing friends, and get their opinions.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
How
How much of your writing would you say you base off of personal experience?
Well, let's see. The story I read just now, the second story that we did together, that's probably 90% autobiographical. The only things that weren't true is, let's see. Oh, I gave my daughter a friend that had a black belt in karate because I wish she had one at the time. And she didn't have one, so I gave her one in the story. And then I also. Well, I wrote this collection. I was going to touch it, but I didn't bring it up here with me. My latest book is a novel and story, so it has to. I wanted it to be chronological, and I start with the mother, and then I go to the daughter, go back and forth between the two, doing a mother's story, then a daughter's story. It's all about their relationships with boys and men, the mother's relationships and the daughter's relationship. And to make it fit into the novel better, or into the novel and stories better, I made her relationship last with this guy for 2 years instead of 1. And she kind of gave me a hard time about that. You know, she said, "Give me some credit. It was bad enough I stayed with him for a year. You know, don't make me stay with him for 2 years in the book." But she did forgive me for writing it that way. The story before that, that I read from the podium, I actually did have a brother who ran around stealing trees with another friend of his, and replanting. They replanted them on his front lawn, and they replanted them like they were tomato plants. So they were, you know, this far apart from each other. So they grew into this really twisted forest because, you know, trees need about 20 feet between them, not this much space. And his father really was a cellist for the Detroit Symphony, and he was just oblivious. He didn't even notice the trees. He was just into his job, and I don't remember if his mother was dead or if she wasn't part of the picture anymore. But I did change that up quite a bit. The confrontation never happened. I just decided to make them go into another neighborhood and get in trouble trying to steal a tree. Though there were other confrontations that I knew of and other conversations that I drew from to use in that story. So that one was probably half autobiographical, let's say. I sometimes take real people and I put them into, and I could get in trouble a little bit for this. I'll take a real person, I'll put them in a situation they never were in. So in a sense, I'm giving them actions that they never actually acted. But I haven't had too much trouble with people finding fault with that.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Anybody else?
What inspired you to become a writer?
Well, I was in high school. It's sort of a little bit of a long answer. I was in high school. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I didn't want to go to college. I ended up getting 2 degrees since then, but I didn't like high school. I didn't think I'd like college, and I was really kind of went into a tailspin. I ended up quitting school, and I went off to live in the woods with my dog, just as a rest from being in the world. And while I was out there, I decided I was just going to take long walks and not think about my future and just kind of recover. And I found that if I tried to think too much about what I wanted to be, that made me more depressed. And so I just put those thoughts aside. And I did a lot of reading. And as I was walking around out there, it wasn't like it happened all at once, but it just sort of gradually accumulated me that I wanted to be a writer. And that would be what would make my life worthwhile. Kind of an odd way to go about it, but.
How many years did you live in the woods?
Oh, I only stayed there, actually, I was just going to stay a month because I had a summer job coming up, so it was just sort of something to do between quitting school and going to my summer job. But then, and actually some children were murdered near my campsite. 2 boys were murdered like near my campsite on one side, and I decided to stay anyway because I thought, you know, anything can happen anywhere. And then another boy was murdered like on the other side of my campsite. So like half a mile this way, half a mile that way. And I said, I'm getting out of here. I'm going back to Detroit where it's nice and safe. Forget the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who else has a question? We have time, maybe 2 more? 1 more?
Just north of Detroit, near Ortonville? About an hour north of here, yeah.
1 more question.
Do you have a favorite author?
I don't know if I have a favorite. That's a hard one. I tend to have favorite books more than favorite authors. I do. William Trevor is a short story writer. I like him a lot. I like Alice Munro, who's a short story writer. One of my favorite novels is Beloved. I've read more of Toni Morrison's work, but I don't like everyone she's read, but Beloved is right at the top of my list. And let's see, Michael Cunningham, The Hours. I really love that book. So just, I'll read different authors and I'll like some of their work and not other books by them. As much.
And with that, I think we offer Lisa Lenzo a big round of applause, and thank you very much. We have a few books for sale in the lobby. If you'd like to read more of her work, it's available to you there. Thanks for coming, everybody, and we'll see you at the next reading. November 10th. Come on down for the next reading.
Great.